in a world that is on to the next things, we just don't make a lot of space for ourselves just to take a breath and like reflect. And I think that's the beautiful thing of a sabbatical. It's the same thing with like financial. Like if you are, hand to mouth, trying to make ends meet, bills, you just don't have a lot from a brain capacity perspective. Like you're not doing a lot of dreaming, unfortunately, because you're just so preoccupied with survival. I think to extrapolate that further, like if you are kind of hand to mouth from a time and schedule and things and just piling, like there's not a whole lot of room for self-reflection and like where am I at in the universe. And I think that's the beauty of a sabbatical. You can figure it out.
Tim, I'm coming off a 1 month sabbatical and I thought we could talk about this idea of developing a sabbatical mindset before retirement, not just something that we delay into the future. And I'm not quite sure where the conversation's going to go, but I'm really looking forward to it because you took a 1 month sabbatical 5 years ago. You're getting ready to take another one here in the fall for 2 months, and so we'll talk about that as well. But there's something different about taking an extended period of time off than there is just a week or two of vacation, and so, looking forward to the conversation, and, we'll see where it goes and how it fits into the financial plan.
Yeah, we really haven't debriefed much since you've been back, so this is gonna be kind of a good conversation. I'm kind of very interested to see how you viewed your experience, and because you're fresh off of it, and I've done one like you said 5 years ago, and I'm about ready to do another one, and I think it'll be a good conversation.
Let's set the stage, just so people understand. Well, I mean, that term is thrown around a lot. And I actually did a little bit of research into the history of sabbaticals because my experience being in academia is that you would have tenured professors that have been with the university for maybe 20, 30 years. And they would finally get to this period of time where they get to take a sabbatical and they go away for like a year, or, it could be a semester or longer. And at least in my experiences, that's a little bit different than what we're talking about because often those faculty members would still go off and be doing work, but they would be exploring work kind of on their own terms. They might go to another university and do research, or they might travel internationally and do some scholarship work, certainly at a different pace. But what we're talking about here is really a period of time that is just completely unplugged. So I took a month, you've taken a month before, you're taking 2 months. And in addition to the academic space, I have some friends that are in pastoral work, which is the other area that I commonly hear about this,
Yeah.
where, after 7, 8, 9, 10 years working at a church or a place of worship, somebody might have off for 2 months, 3 months, really to kind of rest, reset, and hopefully come back, not to leave the institution, hopefully to come back with some reinvigoration of the type of work that they're doing. And we have had this as a benefit for our team members at YFP for what, 7, 8 years? I mean, really since the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think since we developed our team handbook and our benefits and things like that, I think it's been always been there. So, um, it was a couple years until I took my first one, and then Kim, who's a planner on our team, took one, and now you. So, um, but I just thought it was important. I feel like it's one of those things. Like it's like having kids, Tim. It's like there's never a good time to do it, right? But I think there are so many benefits both for yourself and for others, for the team, to actually go through it. I just thought it was really important for me to model that, because I think if I didn't do it, then it would be harder for, it's kind of like an unlimited vacation policy. If you have an unlimited vacation policy, it sounds great, but if your leadership is not taking time off, then it almost has like the opposite, effect of people taking no time at all.
That's right.
So yeah, it's been around for us for a while, and we've had, 3 instances now of people using it, and I'm about to be the fourth, repeat offender, so to speak. But yeah, I think it's awesome, and I think it's often one of the things that catches people's like attention, when we talk about it.
Yeah, and just for context, what we do here at YFP is After 5 years, it's 1 month off, and then we do a financial stipend alongside of that. So they're still on payroll, so still getting paid throughout the sabbatical, and then there's a financial stipend on top of that. And then at 10 years, which is the one you're getting ready to go on, it's 2 months off and then a larger stipend. So I want to make sure people understand that context, because as we talk through our own experiences, we're not getting paid for a month, right? Plus, there's a little bit of budget on top of that for some of the experiences that we might be going on as well. Talk a little bit more when you and I sat down, probably almost 10 years ago now, and we were developing our handbook and just starting to build out our team, looking at how we would do leave and time off. We do have an unlimited PTO policy, but we felt like even in a virtual work environment that has more flexibility, we felt like this 1 month off or 2 months off after 10 years was an important part, not only in terms of recruitment and retaining our team members, but also just to the culture of what we wanted to build. And one thing that always sticks with me, Tim, is you've said before, like, this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? The work that we're doing. So just curious to hear kind of your philosophy. I know this is something you were really passionate about when we first developed it.
Yeah. So, I think if I think about my life and growing up, maybe stems back to, I don't know, maybe I was like 10 years old, and this wasn't necessarily a sabbatical, but like my dad worked for the same company his whole career, before he went, during the Vietnam War and then afterwards, and, went to college. And so because he stayed at the company for so long, he just had a good amount of vacation that I thought at the time was just a crazy. So like one summer, I think when I was 10 years old, he had amassed enough vacation to take off for a full month, which I had never heard of that. So, my parents having, no, camping or RVing experience, thought that it was a good idea to throw three kids into one of those old conversion vans, drive out
Oh yeah.
west, and really, we did this month-long trip, kind of newbies from a camping perspective in this travel trailer, and had my Super Nintendo all hooked up. And, me and my brother had all the different jobs when we get to a campsite. And I just thought that we made it type of thing. Like, it was so great for the five of us to be able to, my mom's a teacher. So, she had off during the summer, but, my dad had to take vacation. So I think it stems from that, and like the ability to pull away from work and to have that experience. And then, as I started my career, and I think a lot of pharmacists and people in healthcare can relate to this, I think, burnout is a very big thing. And I don't think it's just the jobs. We talked about this a little bit before. It's not just a job problem. It's a me problem. It's our client's problem. It's our community problem, because we have a hard time saying no. We're overachievers. Maybe we're perfectionists. So
And
we
then the
can,
profession to help, right? Lots
yeah,
of,
yeah, we want
yeah.
to help people, and we feel like if we say no, they're, are we going to be judged or whatever? So there's just a lot of that goes into that. So it's not just a job problem, although, I do believe that, you know, work will take and take and take until there's nothing left, right? So I do think that setting up, boundaries is really important. I think for a lot of, especially younger pharmacists, it's hard for them to say no. So, I always say that, I feel like a lot of corporate America and just jobs in general, kind of, you alluded to it, is we're running a marathon at a sprinter's pace, and it's just not sustainable. So there have been times in my life where I'm and I just envision, I'm kind of I'm like the Wile E. Coyote, and I'm running, I'm kind of chasing, a carrot or the Roadrunner, and it's just around the bend. It's just around. I just have to,
Keep
work the
going,
next
keep
6 months
going.
at an 80-hour
Mhm.
clip, and I'm gonna get that promotion, or I'm gonna get that raise or whatever. And it's just not a great way to live life, right? And so I I I think I observed my own experience and reflected on that, and then family members that have been really successful, but maybe at the behest of health, family, things like that, and then really our clients too. Um, and I just thought that this was really something important to do, to be able to take a step back So we talk about that. Like, I think one of the beauties of a financial planner is that, you go and you go and you go and you wake up and 10 years goes by and you, unless you're really intentional about it, like you don't take the time to self-reflect and be like, is this what I want to do? And I think a sabbatical in the same vein is like that, right? So you take a minute and figure out, like, where am I at in this universe? Like, am I doing the things that I want to do? Are there things that I'm not doing, and what am I doing about it? So I just think we talk about this with family leave. So we do 12 weeks of paid family leave for, baby and things like that. Like, those are great benefits. Like, just like the sabbatical was a great benefit, but in a small team, it's like the team shoulder, like we shoulder it as
Yeah.
the employers, but the work still goes on. So we're not saying the work stops, and we're not saying like pay stops or anything like that. It still goes on, but I think it forces you to, I think of your job and efficiency. And like when I went on sabbatical, there were so many things that like I hadn't really documented yet in the business that was just up here. And it forced me to do that, because one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I'm sure you can attest to this a little bit, being all like, you walk away for 30 days and like the earth still turns. The clients are still being taken care of. Like, I'm running payroll when you're not here, right? Like, it happens. So like, that's a great feeling to be able to, maybe some people are like, oh, that's a terrible feeling because, like, especially if you work for someone else, maybe you feel expendable. I don't know. But for me, like, one of the biggest things that I took away coming back was like, hey, like, I'm important to what we do at YFP, but like the show goes on, right?
Amen.
And that's a great feeling for something that you've built from scratch.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been reflecting on a lot, Tim, is, as the title suggests, developing a sabbatical mindset before retirement. There's this trap that we can fall into. We've talked about on the show before, if we're not careful, just constant delayed gratification, right?
Yeah.
We're saving hard, aggressively, we're working hard, aggressively, 20, 30, 40 years. And we can have this somewhat unrealistic expectation that we're just going to wake up at 60 or 65 and boom, we've got this nest egg. We've got 3, 4, $5 million saved. And now we're going to live our rich life, right? Now it's time to begin to do that. And I think probably a whole discussion that's important around, like, why is that? Where does that come from? What are our lived experiences? Probably watching our parents or grandparents go through a very traditional, situation like that. But one of the things I noticed is that being off for an entire month, or in your case, you're going to be off for 2 months, is so different than a week or even 2 weeks, because it really forces you into some rhythms that you start to get a sneak peek into those retirement years, right? And I think, for anyone who's listening who's thinking about early retirement, to me, this should be like a must do.
Yeah. Like
Like,
a dry,
do
dry run.
yeah, do a dry run, because, we did a ton of activities. We spent 2 weeks touring Major League Baseball stadiums throughout the Midwest. It was incredible. We went to Cincy, Cleveland, Chicago, did Wrigley. It was awesome, right? But we were on the go, on the go, on the go, like you would a vacation. And then we kind of settled into 2 weeks of, I don't want to say nothingness. We did a lot, but my family is in Buffalo, and we established kind of a new rhythm, a new routine. But there was almost this like detox period of a week or 2 weeks that normally doesn't happen on vacation. And then you settle into just some of the rhythms and routines that I started to see, like, oh, wow, like in retirement, like this could be really rich. Like, Jess and I are going to have time to go work out together, to go read together, to go do these things that just normally in this phase of life, right, with kids, or even a normal vacation of a week or 2 weeks, you just don't see those things. And I know we talk a lot about this, of trying to visualize the future, and putting yourselves into your future self. And, what does that look like relationally? What does that look like financially? But that's just hard to do. And I think there's something really powerful about just being in it.
Yeah. And I think, I had the same kind of, and I don't know if mine was entirely positive. I think it really, like, when I went through the sabbatical 5 years ago, like, I feel like I struggled. Like, I struggled with like planning and Like the feeling that I wasn't getting like the most out of the time and like not wanting to like fritter it away. And I feel like, I don't know if anxiety was the word, but I had anxiety about like, and part of it, like, kind of to joke with it, and this isn't something that you experience, but like, I'm sure there's retired couples that experience this is, Shay's like, oh, that's great. You can do that. But like, don't do anything that I want to do too.
She was
I'm
working,
like,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
because she's working, just like there's some retired couples
Yeah.
that, one works and one retires, right? So, um, and she would admit that I'm a little bit more well-traveled than she is. So like if, if I'm like, oh, I want to go here, she doesn't have the vacation time to go, then like, I'm not going to go. Um, so, this coming sabbatical, like we have a trip to Brazil to go to one of her cousin's wedding, and then we have Berlin where she's running a marathon and I'm, number one cheerleader. But I think 5 years ago I probably would have like freaked out that like my calendar is not full. And I'm kind of taking a page from like our parenting phase of life where Shay wants to like add an like, hey, the kids need to do this camp and this camp. And I'm like, can we not like fill every minute of the day with structured fun or structured
Mhm.
sports and just like be? So, this like the, I'm taking my sabbatical basically from Labor Day to Halloween. And it's probably one of my favorite times of the year, Tim,
Oh, it's
because the weather's
amazing.
starting to cool down. Football season's upon us. My birthday, Olivia's birthday. I have a wood burning fireplace now out in the backyard and the swim spot, which will be set at a nice warm temperature. Like, I think I'm just gonna like hang out. And,
That's
at
awesome.
first, the first time I was thinking about like a sabbatical, even way back in the day, I was like, oh, maybe I'll just take the time to like just write and like work on my book. And like that didn't happen. But like writing for me is work, right?
That's not a
It
sabbatical.
would not be a
Yes.
sabbatical. So like I have abandoned that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I think with the second go round, like there's certain things I want to do. Like I want to do like a silent retreat or some type of retreat where I'm just going somewhere and, I don't hear three noisy kids and, I just have some time to, just chill and reset. And I'll probably do the Bourbon Trail either by myself or with my brother and, do that. But like, other than that, and the trips that we had to Brazil and Germany, like I just I'm just gonna be, and I'm just gonna kind of let things go. There's some projects that I want to do around the house I just haven't gotten to, like
Yeah.
reorganize my closet and things like that, and that are kind of in the back of my mind. But I think first go around, I was just really anxious about that, and I think retirees or people that are thinking about retire, it was almost like a window into that.
I
It's kind
just
of
was thinking about that.
yeah,
Yes. Yep.
but it's pretty crazy, and I don't know if you can comment on this, but like it's just so nuts how just we talk about like kids being resilient, right? Like how just whether they're physically resilient, I'm definitely not as physically resilient as I was when I was a kid, but just like routine and emotion. Like I remember when I left my job, one of my jobs out of the army, and then like I left, like I had been there for I don't know 4 years, and it was like emotionally like devastated. I was like, I don't know if I'm making the right, and like I was emotional. And I know you kind of talked about this a little, like Ohio State, like I want to say like you're inconsequential, but like it just moves on, like life moves on, and that's what like one of the conversations I had with like Shay with her job. She's like, oh, the work I'm doing is really important, blah blah blah. I'm like, it is, but like if you leave, like, or if they fire you, it's just life goes on, and I guess what I'm trying to say is, I, it's almost like nothing. I'm almost like a nihilist, like nothing matters. I'm not saying that, but like you know, in that month, and I don't know if you can attest to this, it was just like it's almost like you forget your schedule. It's like retirees are like, I don't know how I even was able to work because I'm so busy or whatever it is. And like, I felt that a little bit is like, you fill the time and hopefully it's with things that have meaning for you, but maybe not. Like, it's okay just to be as well. And I think the longer that you're in that, I think there's only so much lounging and chilling out, and then I want to go do something, and whether that's volunteer or travel or whatever it is. But like I just thought it's kind of a commentary into like how adaptable we are. Meaning, if you subtract work, which is central, and we talk about this with pharmacists, kind of work being a very much an identity, a role and identity kind of being interwoven. But if you subtract that out, like you'll figure it out. Now, again, we want to be intentional with that process, but I thought that, and it'd be interesting to see, double the sabbatical this time, how I, we'll have to check in on this conversation when I get back. But, you know, what was your impression? Like, were you worried about like the time off, or like, did you feel like you kind of just seamlessly flowed? I mean, you kind of had two phases of, hey, you're running around, to like, hey, you're kind of establishing a different routine in Buffalo. But what's your thought on that?
I think my preface to that answer is one of the things I thought a lot about on sabbatical is like, we're just in a not lucky, just by design, but we're in a unique position that we have each other's as partners in the business,
Yeah.
right? So like, think about people listening that maybe are a manager or a director or whatever. Like we're in a unique position where we don't do the same task, but like we can walk away knowing that like the other person's got it, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that allows for a lot of freedom and peace of mind and probably an easier transition than would have been otherwise. Um, I did notice though, there almost was like, I described it as like a detox period. I think that so much of my day can run on adrenaline, like from right getting up to kind of getting the morning routine stuff done to obviously four kids at home, really active schedules all evening and coaching, and we're running in 30 directions and, work from beginning of the day, end of the day, even though hours I feel like are in a really good spot of hours that we work. Like it's a busy clip, right? It's a busy pace. And I think there's an adrenaline to that and probably some type of an addiction in the adrenaline or the pace of that. And when I think about like us completely unplugging, and to your point, this is an interesting window into retirement, right? Because we're living one life and running one pace for many years, most of us, and then that is going to drastically change, right? So when I wake up and I'm 55 or 60, like assuming that I'm healthy and able to enjoy those years, like what's consuming most of my schedule today will look very different. That's just the reality. And so I think it was a really interesting window into that, but it took a while for that like adrenaline, I think, to just burn off. And what I found was like once that started to burn off, which I don't think a traditional vacation gets to the time to really let that happen to the full degree, I found myself getting to a space that I was much more present and kind of almost working through some of the boredom, and the restlessness that then it was almost like my eyes opened up to opportunities to be creative, to play, to connect with Jess and the boys and do other things. Like I remember one moment in particular, Tim, we were at a hotel in Cleveland and thankfully nobody else was in the pool because we would have got kicked out for sure. Um, and we just came up with this game in the pool where essentially it was like the equivalent of kill the man with the ball.
Uh,
Because me and
Classic.
the four boys, two, we were playing kind of the long way of the pool, two on each end, and our youngest Benny, so he wouldn't get mauled by his brothers. We put him in the middle as like the neutral man on both teams, and so you had to pass it back and forth, and he was like your neutral outlet. I mean, and it was just like all out physical contact play for 45 minutes an hour, and we played it, a couple days in a row. But like I think too often I don't get to that level of presence and play because just the pace of the day, right, is just kind of going, so much. And it takes a while to get to a place where you like really slow down, almost to like see the opportunities that are there,
Yeah.
in front of me. And
So if you were to drop that same scenario into like a week-long vacation, you would maybe, like you were saying, that you would maybe like decline being in that moment, like roughhousing and everything, because of just maybe not blinders, but like you haven't unwound to the point of like where you not feel comfortable, but like you would want to do that on like a week-long vacation. Is that kind of the gist of what you're saying?
I think it just takes longer for me to get there. Like there might be a 2 to 3 day off ramp, and then I'm kind of starting to think about it on the backside coming back. And so like certainly vacation, has a lot of play, but I just felt like it was almost as if another way to describe it is like everything was slowing down. Like the connection, with the boys, I remember several days when we were in Buffalo. It was like Jess and I kind of established this routine where we were up early talking with my parents and we'd go for a walk and then we would work out. We'd have coffee together. The boys would kind of do their own thing. We did some, Jess and my mom were working on a puzzle throughout the week. And like, it was 1 o'clock after lunch where we like started the day. And I was like, most days at home, like 1 o'clock, I've like hit my wall. Everything started to slow down a little bit, like relationally experience. And I thought that was a really interesting window into like it got me really excited about retirement
Wow.
because
Mine had the
um
opposite effect. It freaked me out about retirement.
really
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's because I just put all these expectations and then, in retrospect, even so, like I saw like what Kim did and she was climbing every
oh my
mountain
gosh,
and I'm like, man, am I sabbatical and wrong? Cause she would just do it to the nth degree. But I think it's just like the
different.
freaking financial plan. Like it just depends on like where you're at in life and like what it
Yeah.
is, right? Like there's no wrong, but I think it's with intention is what we try to, it's interesting you say that, like excited about retirement where I was more like freaking out about it.
But isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting? Because I felt a little bit of this pressure with the planning, and actually our plan evolved several times because I think it started with a very grand, like we were going to do Europe and do some other things, and then Jess and I started talking about like let's talk about the reality of the day, right? So like I think the boys would be up for that and they're good ages, but like they want to swim at the hotel pool. That's what they want to do. Like, I don't know if they're going to like really appreciate Europe and do the things in the way that we think. And so we started to evolve and adjust it. And then I felt like finally we were being a little bit more honest with ourselves of less of like the ideal of what this should be and more of like, what do we want? Right. Which again, so many connections to the financial plan, like as you're talking about. But isn't it interesting that we feel this pressure to like sabbatical, right? Like
where
that
does that
alone
even
is
come from? Yeah.
right. But is that not also true with retirement? Like there's a right, quote, right way to do retirement. Like, well, that's interesting. Where does that come from?
Right. Yeah. It's funny though, too, because like what you experienced with kind of you and Jess, and like I didn't experience that because Shay was still going. Like, so it's very different in that, which
Different.
again, I think that's real world, right? Like my parents retired 5 years apart or something like that. So like my dad was retired and my mom was still going to work, and Shay and I are 5 years, in difference in age. I think the other thing that's important to remember is like 40% of people don't retire when they want. They retire earlier because of a health issue or, they have to take care of a family member. So I think like your both of our situations are very like they're very realistic in terms of like if you apply it to like real world, like for like a
Yeah.
retirement scenario. And I think both of like the emotions and the feelings that we've experienced also apply in that case. And I do think that you're talking like what you were saying about earlier. Like I think there is this feeling or notion about retirement that maybe you had a window in more so than I did. I was kind of like, oh my, like, oh, I was like freaking out and just got more anxiety about it. I think partly because of like just these expectations that I don't know where
Heck
they come
yeah.
from. And also partly because like I felt like I didn't have my person, like I didn't have Shay. And I
Sure.
was just, as you were talking about, I'm like, oh man, like, like starting the day without an alarm clock and coffee and exercise and, you know, making lunch or even like grilling something. Like I was just kind of putting myself in that situation, like, yeah, like with my 2 month sabbatical in terms of like, I'm just gonna smoke some brisket or, get on the flat top and do like cooking and we can kind of do meals together, which now it's almost like, you know, we've restarted the home chef or whatever because it's just like we have 3 kids, we have a million activities, we got to get food on the
My
table
gosh. Yeah.
to shop and meal plan, and it's so hectic right
Yeah.
now, right? And I think what you were describing was like, man, just a like a more, not that it's bad right now, but a more optimal pace to just live
Yeah.
and eat and spend time and exercise versus like, I got to get this workout in, and then get back to the office and I got to get to this, drop one kid off, pick up the other one. It's just so
Yeah.
much
The
right now.
pace.
And Shay and I, we have I'll call it a very healthy debate about like like the kids' activities right now because she's definitely like pile on, and I'm just like, we're at capacity. And the conversation that we had at date night this weekend was, but I've kind of been on record is like swim is a great sport. I know you grew up in a swim family,
Yeah.
but like much like we were talking about, like these benefits are like they're like a team benefit because like when somebody goes on sabbatical, the work goes on, a team has to pick up the slack. Like swim it's a family commitment, right?
Oh, for
Because
sure.
we have
Yeah.
2 kids in swim. They're every other. So Monday, one kid has one, then Tuesday it's the other kid. It's 7 days a week. It's weekends. We have a young daughter, but what the point I'm making here is, am I gonna wake up and it's like, "Mom, like, life is so hectic." Am I gonna wake up in 15 years and be like, "Man, I missed that?" Or am I gonna be like, "That was a hectic time, and, like, I'm kinda glad it's over." And it's probably gonna be a little bit of both, to be honest.
A lot of gray
Um,
area. Yeah.
yeah, but, like, I don't know. I just think that to bring it back to the sabbatical, like, there is no right or wrong with any of this stuff. In a world that is on to the next thing, swipe left, swipe right, screens, scheduling, pile like we just don't make a lot of space for ourselves just to take a breath and like reflect. And I think that's the beautiful thing of a sabbatical. And I think like, it's same thing with like financial. Like if you are, hand to mouth, trying to make ends meet, bills, you just don't have a lot. Like from a brain capacity perspective, like you're not doing a lot of dreaming, unfortunately, because you're just so preoccupied with survival. I think to extrapolate that further, like if you are kind of hand to mouth from a time and schedule and things and just piling, like there's not a whole lot of room for self-reflection and like where am I at in the universe. And I think that's the beauty of a sabbatical. You can figure it out. Um, in between my careers in logistics and financial services, I was out of work for 9 months just to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. So that was kind of my first, I don't know if you call that a sabbatical. Um, but that was my first foray into be like, man, there's some things personally that I need to change, but just also it was like a reflective period of like, what is my next move? And I think that's where you have the most growth. Now, again, there I wasn't like working or making any money, so there was a different type of stress. Whereas like with this type of sabbatical, you're still getting paid and benefits and all that kind of stuff. But I guess the point I'm trying to make in a long roundabout way is like just having that space to make sure that you're intentional with the choices that you're making and not just kind of checking off the next box or going on to the next thing. It's just really important to have that.
And one of the things we also found, I'd be curious to hear, if you feel the same way, because I think our situations are just different. And to your point, like there is no right, and I think that's part of the whole challenge here is like finding what works, for you individually. But for us, it was so important for us to get out of our space. Jess and I think often feel a little bit of burnout with, she's homeschooling the boys or has homeschooled their boys. Our oldest is going into school this year's freshman year. But she'll still be homeschooling our other three, home all day, right? We spend a lot of time together. I was working from home predominantly. I haven't been as much over the last, 9 months or so. But it was really important for me, home, as much as I love home, it can also become a reminder of like all the tasks that need to get done. And it was so helpful to like completely unplug out of that, both from that task home type of environment, but also like, to your point about the pace of activities, we knew this, like we knew we were over activitied, if that's a term, but like this was confirmation of that for us. Like it was just so nice, but it also took a ton of work to like unplug. And I think we had to get over some stuff. Like, we tried to pick the window of time, like for us in this July window, we're between, for the most part, spring sports and fall sports. But we had to, our third son, Levi, like we had to pull him out of baseball for the last 10 days. He didn't finish. Now we communicated that 6 months in advance, but like, that was part of the reality of trying to make this happen. Our oldest Sam, who's going to be trying to go out for the basketball team, like open gyms all summer, like things that he was going to be missing. That was like a little bit of FOMO, right? Of like, that. And obviously as they get older, like they've got friends they want to be around. And so like you're kind of negotiating that of being a month away. So I don't know if there is a right time, but for us, it was really important to like really get away. Like we had to be out of our environment, which I think helped us get to a place of just being more present a little bit faster. I think if we would have been home, that would have been more challenging. But I don't know. Maybe that doesn't resonate with you. Maybe it's just different.
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't. Like, so when I started Script Financial in 2015, 2016, like I've been working from home, but since then, obviously before COVID, but like I recognized very early in my career, or in this role that like I needed separation of church and state. I needed separation
Yeah.
of like work and home. So, very early in my, the earliest, I would be working out of like my bedroom in my apartment, or I have a separate office. But like for me, that equated to like work never stopping. Like I was always working around the clock, or oh, let me just check some email and catch up on some
Sure.
email at midnight or whatever. Like, and so like I needed to, even if it was right down the street, which, fortunately, the longest commute that I've had, since we've had office space is like 7 minutes, which is awesome. When I worked in the LA area, sometimes it'd take me 2 hours to get to work, and that sucks. So, um, so like it does and it doesn't, in a sense that like I've always kind of had that, I'm kind of looking at really my home as more of a, like, okay, let me look at my house as like, oh, these are some things that even on the weekends I can't get to, or like, some of those projects that I've been talking about that I'm excited to kind of get done, to kind of
Yeah.
make the space a little bit more optimized. I think one of the conversations that I've had at the last sabbatical and this one coming up is like, I think Shay's first thought is like, oh, you're going to be home for a month or two in the summer, like free daycare. And I'm like, that's not happening. Like, I'm not here to just be an extension. I love my kids, but like, we're still going to have a summer nanny and Zoe's still going to go to daycare because I want the ability to go and, do stuff. So that was something that I had to draw kind of like a boundary around, and, or, my wife would take the opportunity to save some dollars. But like, to me, like that's not the purpose of a sabbatical, because, you're just doing work, that different type of work. Not that, I don't like taking care of my kids, but, I think for us too, like when I was thinking about, you're talking about timing, um, I was thinking about, taking all of basically June and July. But the thing that I forgot is, again, going back to swim, is like in the summertime, it's like it's almost like school. The kids are like, hey, can we watch a movie tonight? And it's like, no, you got to go to bed because you have swim at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then, my oldest has swim that, at nights too, because she does morning, she does club at night. So it was basically the last week or so, we're like through the summer swims, and now we have a break. But like that, being out activity, we talked about that, like the front part of the summer is dominated by that. And then I would kind of be working around that. So, yeah, like I said, I think those, again, I think it goes back to intention and, setting ground rules. I think for me, I'm walking into this a lot with a lot less of like, hey, on this day I'm doing this, or I'm at this hour I'm doing this, and more like there's like mile markers through it. But like, like I just mentioned, I had to set up some ground rules with my wife, being like, I'm not free daycare. Like I'm not like that's not the purpose of me being off. Because especially like our youngest Zoe, she's probably the most difficult out of the three, and she would just be bossing me around for 2 months, right? So,
Maybe you need a sabbatical after your
I would
sabbatical.
need a sabbatical after that. Exactly right. So,
I do think 2 months, so Tim, is different, right? Because like I'd be curious to just we should do this again when you get back. But I think with the 2 month window, there's more margin where you can have the experiences, right? You guys are doing the international trip. You talked about the Bourbon Trail, time with your brother, like maybe a
yeah.
silent. You can do those, and that's not the whole time. Like there could also be the space for like, hey, I'd love to get a home project done, that I wasn't gonna, get done otherwise. So, I could see where the time that's available, could be very different. Let me hear your thoughts on this. Jess and I were talking about this when we were walking the other night of like, naturally the question is, you know, would we do it again? Like next summer, would we take a month off? And we started to talk through all the logistics, right? Kids schedules. Next summer, I've got a 16-year-old that might start driving, and like, does he really want to be hanging out with mom and dad when he's got the keys to a car? And all the things. Maybe a summer job that's now in the mix, right? So I think we quickly got to this point of like, maybe it doesn't work anymore, like after this point. And then we got to the other side of the coin of like, maybe that is the point to like make it work, right? And to kind of fight against all of these objections for why it's not possible. Is like, maybe that's the point. Like you've got to kind of work hard to pave the way to like have the experience, and it doesn't come like free. Like there's a cost on some level, right? To trying to figure all that out, but it does feel like it's going to get more challenging.
Yeah, and you're probably entering that window of time where um it's more challenging because like your kids are entering that stage of life where they're trying to figure out things for themselves. Now,
Right.
they'll eventually come back. You might get to a point in life where like, hey, um, I'm renting a beach house for a couple weeks, and just come with your families, like free vacation type of thing. They'll be all about that, right? But right now where they're going is like, hey, mom and dad aren't cool. I want to spend time with my friends, or maybe a sport's taken off or whatever. And you know, I I think that was the selling point when we bought our motorhome was, I told Shay, I'm like, hey, we can buy this real estate investment, or our oldest, we have, I don't know at the time, 8 more years where we're cool, and they're gonna want to do this. And like that was kind of what pushed, those were the heartstrings that I pulled to kind of push that over the edge. But if you think about this, again, we're kind of like overlaying retirement. There are things that you can control and there's things that you can't control, right? So I think about, I think about where, if you take the RV case, where I was like, hey, that would be something that I would love that we were going to do in retirement, but then we were like, let's do it now. Um, Partly because like now we have our kids, but also I look at, kind of my parents, and, my dad turns 80 this year. Like they're not driving a big RV around. Like it's hard to get around, just physically. So like you're kind of talking about the family dynamics, because that's kind of the space and time that you're at with your family. But if you extrapolate that to retirement, like, you're walking because you want to spend quality time with your wife, but also because it's good for your health, right? And, hopefully that translates to like longevity, but like nothing's guaranteed, right? Nothing's guaranteed. So like I think the point that I'm trying to make is like, all we have is the now, right? We plan for the future, but we're not guaranteed anything in the future. So, and I think that it kind of goes back to life plan, and it's like, if there is something, if I asked you like, hey, today is your last day on earth, like, what did you miss? What did you not get to become? And there's something that immediately pops into your mind that you're like, I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. I'm like, don't book that. Like book that now. Do it now. Because there is no guarantee, whether it's, waiting for a sabbatical, whatever, like do it now. So, I think it is an interesting, it's an interesting conversation, and probably one that I think our experience will be different, because I don't want to say like I'm kind of a lone ranger on my sabbatical, but I am, because it doesn't really affect Shay, because she has to work. So a lot of these conversations I'm just having with myself, at the end of it. And
Well, get
again, not
used
that
to
I
it. If
don't,
you go on the silent retreat, get used to
I
those kind
know,
of.
I know. Or if I go somewhere she wants to go, I'll get my own silent retreat when I get back. Um, so, I think it's a good thing to reflect on, because I think I think you're taking stock of like what you have, and, what you have is a captive audience with your four boys, but that
For
might not
now.
always be there. Now it might go away, but it'll come back. Right. So, but I just think it goes back to like the, the intentional the intentional way of how we live our lives. And I think a sabbatical is just it's a great thing to kind of throw into the mix, 'cause I think it gets you to ask a lot of important questions about, your work, your meeting, your relationships,
Yes.
where you're at today versus, in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, or when you retire. Um, so yeah, those are great, great questions.
One of the other connections, I want to talk about objections here in a little bit, for at least a few minutes. But one of the other insights I had thinking about this as a window into retirement is like, I don't think retirement is going to be nor needs to be very expensive. Like I was journaling after the sabbatical of like the top memories and moments I had from it, right? It was playing the game in the pool. It was going for walks. It was, wiffle ball with the boys in the backyard. And there were some expenses, like we went to baseball games and hotels and like just like retirement. I think, yeah, we'd love to do some travel and there's going to be some big expenses, but it feels like it's the relationships, right? It's the connection, it's the time. Small expense of like riding go-karts in Niagara Falls was one of our favorite like moments made of the like cost, but not like huge costs. And I think it was just a good reminder, like as we think about retirement and nest eggs and what we need, and especially for those that are listening that are maybe over saving. We've talked about that before, like at the expense of today. I was like, I don't think it's going to take a lot, actually, overall for that. So, yeah,
I
that
was
was
going to
something
ask
else.
though, I was going to ask you though about that. Like, now that you're kind of through, I think the one of the big expenses you talked about is like baseball tickets, right? Now that you're through that and on the other side of that, um, like, do you think that how you feel is kind of more of a result of the fact that you've earmarked those dollars, put those dollars in a bucket for that purpose versus you just peeled it off from a bigger bucket and it's like, okay, we're going to spend 5 grand or whatever it is on baseball tickets.
Like,
Like that's a little bit more
yeah.
sticker shock. Like, do you think like, again, we always talk about the financial plan. It comes back to the financial plan, but like the way that you're talking about the expense of a sabbatical or the expense of not necessarily working, if we think about it that way from a retirement perspective, um, is that because does that go back to the plan?
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly say, like, especially for somebody who has struggled at times with like frugality and, kind of a
Yeah.
scarcity mindset, it's been a growth area for me. Like, I really didn't think about money during the trip. And I think it is exactly what you're talking about. Not I think I know, right? So, we had earmarked this is the kind of overall budget, like wasn't going to be very super restricted, but generally speaking, this is what we're looking at. This is what we save for. And so when I was buying those tickets and, like we took Jess's parents to the Tigers game, her dad's a big Tigers fan, and we wanted to sit, close. So we sat fourth row and like, I didn't even think twice about like clicking the button. It was like experience at that moment. Right. And then when there was other games where it's like, hey, we like the White Sox, but we're not like in love with the White Sox. It's the experience. Like, let's get the cheaper tickets there, but we're going to splurge when we go to Wrigley, right? Or we're going to do other things there. And I think because they were defined in that, I mean, it was a bucket in Ally, right? It was a sabbatical bucket in our
Right.
Ally account. That really just allowed for the freedom, to enjoy that experience. And I know for me, like going into retirement, we talk about the trained behavior, the muscle you need to build to spend. Like that to me is going to be a critical piece of the puzzle. Like it doesn't matter if there's 2 or 3 or $4 million. Like I need to have those somewhat defined of like, hey, we're going to earmark 50 grand this year for vacations or family experiences or whatever. Cause otherwise I'm just going to be thinking how, like, what's the opportunity cost,
Yeah. And
of
then if the
that.
market goes down and then you
Yeah.
don't have the paycheck, like all that. Yeah, I'm with you. It's I'm gonna make a comment that is, I see this with a lot of clients, and I get it because I was definitely there, and I still am there to a point. But we're fresh off the World Cup, and I've been watching a lot of these videos of people that visited from Europe or
Yeah.
South America or whatever, and they're basically the gist of the video is like, we owe the United States an apology. Like we understand now why half of Americans don't have passports is because you have everything here. The United States is kind of like Europe. You can go a plane right away and be in a different country and, New York is very different than Kansas City. And, one of the things, a lot of clients are like, I want to visit Ireland and I want to visit Paris. And I completely get that. But there's so much here to explore in our national parks and our cities and things like that. So kind of a love letter to the United States. I do think it's great to go out and see other cultures. But I like to see clients are like, hey, I want to see this international city, but like we're working our way through the national parks, or
Yeah.
I want to see Boston
Yeah.
or whatever. We're just very fortunate to live in a country that we live in because there's just so much diversity in terms of our food and cities and, our natural beauty. And to your point, like it doesn't cost a lot. I mean, maybe it costs some money to get there, but it doesn't cost a lot to go see the Grand Canyon, or whatever. And I think it's very indicative of like when we go through kind of the scripture plan meeting, goal setting, a lot of the things that we're talking about, it's very money adjacent. And money's not the main thing. Now it's important, right? But people don't often say like, if I say, hey, what is success like in the next 10 years? People are not saying, I want to retire with $4 million. They're saying, I want to experience this. I want to keep my health. I want to feel like I'm making an impact in my community. And like, if you actually break those down to the component parts, the dollars there aren't necessarily astronomical in most cases. So to your point is, it kind of goes back to the question of like, how much is enough? And most people kind of stick their finger in there and like, I think I'm okay, or I think I'm on track. And for a lot of pharmacists, they want to see the numbers so we can model that. For some people, like my wife, she's like, just tell me I'm okay. Thumbs up, thumbs down. And if I'm not, then like, what do we need to do to be okay? And again, that goes back to the power of planning and doing that work.
Which is why, to toot our own horn of the planning process, like we believe so firmly in like what we call script your plan, right? Which happens after we first go through the get organized step, understand where we are, where we
Yeah.
want to go. Otherwise, we're developing a plan, we're shooting in the dark a little bit of where we're trying to go. And I think this is where digging a layer deeper too is really helpful. As I mentioned this toward the beginning of the episode, but I think Jess and I started the planning with this ideal of what should sabbatical be, right? So we kind of thought like, hey, we got to do the Europe trip. We still want to do all of those things at
Yeah.
some point. But then we slowed down and kind of beat that up and started to map out an itinerary. And then we got to this point of like, for us, which would come up in the script your plan, like being with and around family to a point, right? But being with and around family, like is really important, to us. And so how do we center the experiences around that? So our first 2 weeks, we centered our travel around Jess's family in Toledo. That was kind of our jumping point. Our second 2 weeks,
Yeah.
we were in Buffalo. And we had a decent amount of things that were our own things as a family, but also, that family was a key, piece of that as well. So I think that plays so well into retirement too. Like we talked about this nebulous concept of retirement with some arbitrary date and some arbitrary dollar amount, but like, what does it look like? Right. And what do we want? Why do we want it? And then how do we develop the rest of the plan really to support it and to get it in that direction? Tim, let me ask you your thought. I suspect there's some, maybe more than some that are listening saying, well, Tim, that's great. But like I work for an employer that like, I ain't getting a month off. That's not possible. Now, I'd push back a little bit on that. Several years ago, we had Nick Ornella on the podcast who works for Walgreens who negotiated a year off with Walgreens. And he and I talked, it was way back on episode 79 about redefining retirement. We'll link to that in the show notes. And, he essentially was able to do that because he was a valued employee. And you would think that in a large corporate structure, like negotiating that kind of time off, and he did that to travel the world, wouldn't be possible, right? And so I think I would first challenge, like, if the objection is it's not possible, like, is it really not possible? Have we explored that further? But, whether it's financial limitations, certainly there can be an expense, time limitations. We talk about activities, families, like, does it have to be a month off, right? Because we've talked about this value of getting this peek into retirement before we get to retirement, but are there other ways that we could potentially, accomplish this? Or what are your thoughts on getting the benefits of what we're talking about, even if we can't necessarily take a month off or 2 months off?
Yeah. I mean, I think the greatest way to do it is have an employer fund it, like what we do. And again, we just feel passionate about this. But there are ways to kind of, kind of meet in the middle. It could be stacking vacation, or even parlaying that into like FMLA, where, they're going to hold your position, but you're not necessarily going to be paid. So I think or you negotiate it again, with the employer. I think, again, the best results is to unplug and have couple months off like that, especially if you're trying to just take stock, reset, avoid burnout. But, it could be something where you're unplugging for, a weekend each quarter, a long weekend, a 3-4 day weekend. One of the things that I did, and I've gotten away from, but I've encouraged the team, to do this, is like, take a Friday off every month. And maybe in the summer, it's like, maybe one thing that I might experiment with is take every Friday off in the
Yeah,
summer
4-day week.
for a time, and to see what that looks like. And again, I think, we know this, and I think, again, the further we get away from work, I think the benefits can be there. But like a 3-day weekend or a 4-day weekend, to really intentional with that time to reset. And I've been in jobs, Tim, where, I feel like I work just to get to Friday, and then I just become a ghost for the weekend, just to like recharge my batteries. And I can't really do that as much now, because like at that time I was like a bachelor, and, was just taking care of myself. It's harder with a family because you're just up and running and things like that. But like, I just remember working to Friday, being a ghost just to kind of recharge my batteries. And then it's like, oh crap, it's Sunday again. So like, part of me encouraging myself and the team to take is like, I want them to get to Sunday and be like, okay, like tomorrow's Monday. It's time to go to work, and I'm recharged and I'm refreshed. I'm ready to go, and not like that Sunday dread. It could just be like a week where you're just completely disconnected, and that could be from work, from screens, from, scheduled events, everything. It's just you are there. You exist. Like we talked about, maybe just being creative with PTO. A lot of employers do allow you to go into deficits. Obviously, there's there can be a problem if you need to use that. One of the things that I really like, and again, this is not necessarily a sabbatical, but we do it a Friday every day, where it's just, we clear the calendar and we're just working on YFP stuff. Like, you can do that where, you take a Friday and maybe it's just like wellness stuff, get a massage, meditate, go swim, take a walk, take a hike. Like, I think there's a lot of studies that say, like, if you're out in nature, like, life is just better. Cook a meal. I think and you can incorporate some of these like ingredients into your, be more intentional. So kind of having more of a sabbatical mindset without, completely walking away for a month or two. Probably this next one, is this is one of the things I see, and I alluded to a little bit before, just being like, hey, 2027 is the year of no, right? So, if you have
Amen.
a mission statement or a vision, and you are asked to do something that doesn't add to that cup, to that mission state, like, you have to, and this is so hard for people to do. And I think over time you develop more of that muscle. But I'm not just talking about work. I'm talking about social stuff, kid activities, whatever. Just the ability to say no and have space in your day to day to be able to breathe and reflect is so important, right? And it's hard, right? Because again, we've talked about how pharmacists think. A lot of pharmacists become pharmacists because they want to help people, and if you say no, it's kind of like, hey, you're not, you're smacking that in the face. So, but I think I've had that conversation ad nauseum with clients over the years of like, there's just too much stuff. And again, it's not necessarily financial related. It's more like you're just burning out because you just have so much going on. And then, intentional recovery after busy season. So like, I say this to my wife, like whenever we do, like, Disney is the extreme. Like when we go do my wife plans every minute. She knows rope drop and this and that. And like we get back and we do plan a day where we just like kind of chill in the middle of the vacation just for like a park day where we're just swimming in the pool. But like when we get back from that vacation, I'm like, I'm dead. And I think if I were to build in at least one day of like where I'm just maybe just going through email and nothing else, or what, like that would probably be like a step in the right direction. But when if you're a pharmacist and you're traveling a lot for work or conferences, like being super intentional to have time to recover from that, I think is important. I think just if not, I think it just leads into I'm burnt out, I'm exhausted. So I think those are some ideas. I don't know, Tim, if you had anything else that you would add, as in terms of like how do you, if you can't get that full block of time off, what would you do?
I think what I'm taking away from what you're sharing, which are some great ideas, are like a month off, 2 months off, a year off. Like if it's there, great. That's
Yeah.
probably an extreme, example. But if you're feeling kind of, I think what I was feeling, of just like it's go, 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 right? It's activities, it's 24. So like, what are some small steps of like things you can do right now that begin to step in the right direction, right? So, hey, I'm not checking email or working in the evenings or on the weekends. Like, is the weekend really a weekend, right? Are the evening, because even like I feel like I can get into that optimization. I've shared this with you before where it's like, well, I'm sitting out my son's soccer practice, like might as well catch up on a few things. And like I'm fooling myself. There's only so much energy that is available. I like to think about this as like a bucket, right? There's a bucket of energy available in the day. And like I can always get one more thing done, but there's a diminishing return of that. And it's very different if I'm sitting out at a soccer practice with my phone away, no agenda, maybe reading some fiction or just looking at the clouds versus I'm trying to like catch up on a bunch of things. Like I'm in the same spot for an hour. Those are two very, very different things. So like, are there even some small structural changes that can allow, because again, we're talking about this window into retirement. We're starting to kind of begin to think about or train ourselves of what does life look like outside of work, right? What does life look like in a much more slowed down, version? So yeah, I think that's great. If we can get long time off, extended weekends, maintenance days, all these things, but are there even small steps that we can take of like really shutting off work, on the evenings and weekends or other times and just really trying to be okay with some boredom, along the way?
And kind of piggyback on what you were saying is like I think when Liam first started hockey, I was kind of multitasking watching his hockey, but then going through email or whatever. And he's like, "Hey, Dad, did you see that sick goal that I have?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah," but I was looking at a freaking email, like I didn't see it, and like part of me beats myself up about that. Not that it's like Game 7 of the Stanley Cup, but like I wasn't present. And, like, I'm there to be present and support him. I'm not there like, that email can wait. Um, and I think another thing that comes to mind, I've actually had a client very early on, structure this. She kinda came to me and she's like, "I don't necessarily wanna wait to retire. I just wanna have, like, small retirements." So, like, she'll work and she'll have, like, breaks in her like, she'll have, like she does, like, a lot of she's actually not a pharmacist, she's a doctor. She has, like, contract work. So she'll work for 2, 3, 4 years, and then she'll take, like, a year off, and then she just travels and does whatever, and then she gets another contract. Like, there are things in pharmacists or there are different jobs in pharmacy that are maybe more conducive to that, where you can kind of structure more, these are she calls them mini retirements, but they're like sabbaticals. Um,
Could also be transitions of employment. Like those could be other opportunities where, hey, and again, it's going to take some financial planning, of course, but if there's a job transition coming up, like instead of turning around, like could you use that as a 3 month gap,
Yeah, it's one thing you can negotiate. A lot of employers are like, "Hey, can you start yesterday?" It's like, "Actually, I'm like, I'd love to be able to start September 1. I'm gonna take August and go do what I need to do." Again, there's some, but if like again, it goes back to the plan. Like if that might be something that you do, and maybe we plus up your emergency fund, or maybe we just have a bucket that we're funding that is kind of the sabbatical bucket. So when we're ready to take it, we're paying ourselves that month's paycheck because we know it's going to turn off for a month and, we'll get it back. But yeah, I think, a lot of the conversation goes back to intentionality. It goes back to the plan. I think it goes back to retirement and work not being like a destination. It's just a chapter in the book, right? And I think if we look at it as a destination, I think we're going to be sorely disappointed, to be completely honest, because I think that shine rubs off after a while. And you're like, okay, what am I doing? Or why didn't I do this when I was 45 versus 65? Maybe I'm not as able-bodied, that type of thing. So
Great stuff. I think that's a great place to end. And, if there's one takeaway, hopefully that we're challenging ourselves with, challenging you with, as well as, what can we be doing today, right? To start thinking about designing, experimenting, living our rich life today, while we also, of course, continue to plan, for the future as we always do. So, Tim, great stuff. We'll be back at it here in a couple weeks. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scripted Wealth, Money and Meaning for Pharmacists. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave us a rating and review, and share the show with a friend or colleague. It really helps more pharmacists discover the show and join us on the journey toward living a rich life today and tomorrow. And if today's episode got you thinking about your own financial plan, retirement goals, or what a rich life means for you, we'd love to help. You can learn more about our fee-only comprehensive financial planning services by visiting yfpwealth.com. And finally, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information of the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. For more information, you can visit yfpwealth.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great rest of your week.